If you've ever poured your entire professional life into one place, dedicated your career to a single mission, only to have it all snatched away in a heartbeat, then you're going to want to hear this. For 30 years, I was the keeper of a flame, the one man trusted to tell the story of a corporate giant. But when the founder's son decided he'd rather sell a myth than honor a legacy, he made one critical mistake. He forgot that history isn't just written by the victors. Sometimes it's written by the historian they fired. Stick around, and I'll tell you how I used the truth to dismantle an empire built on a lie. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a boss try to take credit for your work or erase your contributions. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about getting the last word. My name is Owen. For 3 decades, I was the official company historian for Veridia Dynamics. It sounds like a dusty, forgotten role, something from a black and white movie. But at Veridia, it was a position of immense trust. I was hired personally by the founder, Marcus Thorne, a man who was equal parts titan and tyrant, innovator and brute. He was a force of nature who had clawed his way from a garage workshop to a global technology powerhouse. My task, the one he set for me on my first day, was to chronicle everything, to be the company's living memory. But more than that, he commissioned me to write his authorized biography. He didn't want a puff piece. Marcus was too vain for simple flattery. He wanted a monument, a testament, something that would last. He used to say, "Owen, truth has a longer shelf life than myth. Don't you dare sand down the edges." I took him at his word. For 30 years, I had unparalleled access. I interviewed every original employee, documented every breakthrough, and sat through hundreds of hours of conversations with Marcus himself. He gave me the keys to the kingdom, including a literal key to a small fireproof safe in his personal office. Inside were his private journals, dozens of them filled with his jagged, impatient scrawl. "It's all in there," he'd told me, his voice a low rumble. "The good, the bad, the ugly, the truth." Then Marcus died. The transition of power was swift and brutal. His son Logan Thorne took over. Logan was everything his father was not: polished, smooth, armed with an MBA from a school that taught him spreadsheets were more important than people. He had his father's ambition, but none of his substance. Logan saw Veridia not as a legacy to be stewarded, but as an asset to be stripped and sold for parts, preferably to the highest bidder in an initial public offering. And I, the keeper of the truth, was a liability. The end came on a Tuesday, in a conference room so sterile it felt like an operating theater. Logan sat across the vast, polished table, flanked by a woman from HR who looked like she'd memorized a script on how to project empathy while feeling none. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He said, "Owen, we're moving in a new direction, a forward-looking direction. The company needs to be agile, and frankly, projects like the biography, they're anchors to the past." I just sat there, my hands resting on the table. I could feel the faint tremor in my fingers, the only sign of the earthquake happening inside me. Logan continued, leaning forward with an expression of feigned sincerity that he must have practiced in a mirror. "We've decided to cancel the book project. It's a matter of protecting the family's privacy. My father was a private man." That was the first lie. Marcus Thorne was the least private man I had ever known. He craved the spotlight, reveled in his own complicated story. He wanted it told, warts and all. What Logan meant was that the truth was inconvenient for the myth he was trying to sell to Wall Street. The myth of his father as a solitary genius, a lone wolf who built an empire from nothing. And Logan added, looking at the HR woman as if for reinforcement, "We're also eliminating the historian role. It's a legacy position that no longer fits our streamlined operational structure." 30 years, a lifetime of dedication, of carefully building an archive that was the soul of the company, eliminated, streamlined, just like that. The HR woman slid a folder across the table. It contained the details of my severance package. A meager sum, a slap in the face calculated to the penny based on legal minimums, not on loyalty or contribution. There was a non-disclosure agreement that was about an inch thick. I didn't open the folder. I just looked at Logan. I think he expected me to argue, to plead. Maybe he wanted me to, just so he could have the satisfaction of shutting me down. But I said nothing. I just gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I understand," I said. My voice was even, calm. It seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He stood up, eager to end the meeting. Good. HR will escort you to your office to collect your personal effects. My office wasn't just an office, it was a sanctuary of memory. 30 years of my life lined the walls. When the security guard and the HR drone stood in the doorway watching me like a common thief, I methodically began to pack. I didn't take the company-owned artifacts, I took my notebooks, I took my audio recordings, and most importantly, I took the 36 cardboard boxes that contained my research, my personal property, transcripts, cross-references, outlines, and photocopies of every single page of Marcus Thorne's private journals. Logan had been so busy streamlining me that he'd completely overlooked the nature of my work. The company owned the desk and the computer, but the research, the intellectual architecture of the biography that was mine. I had built it piece by piece over decades. Logan, in his arrogance, just saw dusty old papers. He had no idea he was letting the company's biggest secret walk right out the front door. As I rolled the last dolly of boxes toward the elevator, I passed the grand bronze and oil portrait of Marcus Thorne that dominated the lobby. The artist had captured the fierce intelligence in his eyes. I stopped for a moment, looking up at him. I could almost hear his gravelly voice echoing in my memory. "Don't you dare sand down the edges, Owen." I felt a cold sense of clarity wash over me. The authorized biography was dead, but the book was still very much alive. Logan wanted to protect his family's privacy, to build a myth for his IPO. He thought he'd silence the past. He was about to find out that the past was about to speak, and it would be in my voice. The book was still being written, but now it was an unauthorized biography. And as I walked out of that building for the last time, I already knew who would get to read the first chapter. The quiet in my car on the drive home was heavier than any sound. The city noise faded into a dull hum, the drone of a world that was moving on without me. Each red light, each intersection, was a small, suspended moment where the reality of it all crashed down in waves. 30 years. It wasn't a job, it was my identity. Owen, the historian, the man who knew the stories. Now I was just Owen, a man in his late 50s with a trunk full of paper and a future that had suddenly become a terrifying, empty landscape. I pulled into my driveway and just sat there for a long time, the engine off, the keys still in my hand. My house, usually a comfort, felt like a museum of a life that had just ended. The boxes in the back were a physical weight, a 30-year anchor that I had dragged home with me. I finally got out, my legs feeling unsteady, and began the slow, methodical process of unloading my life's work. Box by box, I carried them into my study, the room where I'd spent countless nights and weekends piecing together the sprawling epic of Marcus Thorne and Veridia Dynamics. The room was my fortress, but now it felt like a tomb. I stacked the boxes against the wall, a cardboard monument to a canceled project, a canceled life. I didn't open them. I couldn't. Instead, I walked over to the small cabinet where I kept a bottle of single malt scotch, a habit I'd ironically picked up from Marcus. He always said the good stuff was for closing deals or mourning disasters. This felt like both. I poured a glass, the amber liquid catching the fading afternoon light, and sank into the worn leather chair that faced my empty desk. The silence in the room was absolute. No hum of a computer, no rustle of papers, no looming deadline, just a profound, hollow emptiness. And in that silence, the betrayal began to fester. It wasn't just the firing. It was the casual, effortless cruelty of it. The way Logan had erased 3 decades of my existence with a few corporate buzzwords, streamlined, forward-looking. He had taken my purpose and tossed it into a shredder to make his quarterly report look cleaner. My mind started to drift back, a slideshow of memories playing against the backdrop of my quiet study. I saw myself as a young man, barely 30, sitting in this same office, well, a much smaller, less impressive version of it, across from Marcus Thorne himself. He wasn't the polished icon from the magazine covers. His tie was loose, his sleeves were rolled up, and his eyes had an intensity that seemed to burn right through you. I was a young academic with a promising but unremarkable career in historical research. He'd read an article I'd published on industrial titans of the Gilded Age and had summoned me to his office. He leaned across his massive oak desk and jabbed a finger at me. "You write about dead men," he'd said, his voice a low growl. "You dissect their legacies. How would you like to work with a living one? He'd offered me a job that didn't exist, to be his Boswell, his personal historian. He wasn't just offering me a salary, he was offering me a front-row seat to history in the making. I'm going to build something that lasts 100 years, he'd promised, and you're going to write it all down, not the sanitized garbage they put in press releases, the real story, the blood and guts of it. Can you handle that, Owen? I'd said yes without a second's hesitation. It was the most exciting moment of my life, and for years it was. I had a unique relationship with Marcus. I wasn't an employee in the traditional sense. I was a confessor. He'd call me at all hours, summoning me to his office or his home, and he would just talk. He'd pace his office, a storm of energy, recounting boardroom battles, hostile takeover attempts, and moments of brilliant, terrifying inspiration. He told me things I'm certain he never told anyone else. Not his lawyers, not his board, not even his own family. He trusted me. Or rather, he trusted the historical record I represented. I remembered one night, years ago, we were in his study, a room far grander than my own, surrounded by leather-bound books he'd never read. He was older then, the fire in his eyes banked but still glowing. He walked over to that small, fireproof safe hidden behind a false panel of books. He spun the dial with a familiarity that spoke of long use, and the heavy door swung open. He pulled out a stack of worn leather-bound journals. He placed them on the desk between us. "This is it, Owen," he'd said quietly. "This is the source code." He opened one to a random page. His handwriting was a chaotic scrawl, a testament to a mind that moved faster than his hand. "When I'm gone," he continued, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "Logan will try to turn me into a saint. He's weak. He thinks legacies are built on praise. He's wrong. A legacy is a structure. It has to be built on a solid foundation, and that means acknowledging the cracked stones and the crooked lines. It all goes in the book. Everything." He pushed the journals toward me. "Tell the whole story, Owen. The good, the bad, the ugly. Promise me." I promised. It was a sacred pact, a promise I intended to keep. I spent years cross-referencing those journals with public records, with my own interviews, with financial statements, and the story that emerged was far more complex and compelling than the simple myth of a solitary genius. It was a story of genius, yes, but also of ruthlessness, a story of loyalty and profound betrayal. The ugly part he'd mentioned wasn't just a turn of phrase, it was a name, Arthur Vance. The scotch burned on its way down, and the memory of Arthur's name solidified my resolve. Arthur Vance was the ghost in the machine of Veridia Dynamics. His name appeared nowhere in the official company history, but in Marcus's journals he was everywhere. Arthur was the engineering genius. Marcus was the visionary, the salesman, the force of will. They were partners in the truest sense, working out of a dusty garage in the early days. Arthur designed the core technology that launched the company, a revolutionary processing architecture that was a decade ahead of its time. Marcus, in his own journal, called Arthur the other half of my brain. But as success grew, Marcus grew paranoid. He saw Arthur's quiet, unassuming brilliance not as an asset, but as a threat. The journals laid it all out in excruciating, self-aware detail. Marcus described how he systematically diluted Arthur's shares, how he maneuvered him into signing documents he didn't understand, how he used a manufactured disagreement over a minor technical issue as a pretext to invoke a buyout clause in their partnership agreement, a clause Arthur hadn't even known was there. He bought out the other half of his brain for pennies on the dollar just before the company went supernova. He cheated his original partner, the man who was his best friend, out of a fortune that would now be measured in the billions. He erased him from the story completely. Arthur Vance, broken and broke, disappeared into obscurity and died a few years later of what the papers called a heart attack, but what Marcus's journal entry from that day called the final invoice. For years I'd wrestled with this. This was the cracked stone at the very foundation of the empire. My promise to Marcus was to tell the whole story, and this was the ugliest, most central part of it. My plan for the authorized biography was to frame it as Marcus's great defining sin, a tragic flaw in an otherwise great man. I would present it not as an accusation, but as a confession, using his own words from the journals as a form of posthumous absolution. It would have been a masterpiece of nuance, a complex portrait of a complex man. But Logan didn't want nuance, he wanted a cartoon. The catalyst for my action came not from a place of anger, but from a place of profound, sickening disgust. I was scrolling through the financial news online, a habit of 30 years I couldn't yet break. And there it was, a press release from Veridia Dynamics, officially announcing their intent to file for an IPO. The article was accompanied by a slickly produced feature on the company's history, with a large, smiling photo of Logan Thorne. The headline read, "Veridia's next chapter, Logan Thorne to take father's legacy public." The article was a nauseating work of fiction. It painted Marcus Thorne as a lone inventor, a Steve Jobs-esque figure who conjured a technological revolution out of thin air through sheer solitary brilliance. It mentioned his unwavering ethical compass and his commitment to fair play. There was no mention of Arthur Vance. There was no mention of a partner. There was no mention of the garage. The story began with Marcus, fully formed, a genius stepping onto the world stage. They hadn't just sanded down the edges, they had bulldozed the entire landscape and built a cheap theme park in its place. And then I saw the line that made my blood run cold. The article quoted a source close to the family who said Logan is building on the myth of his father. Myth. They were openly calling it a myth. They were proud of the lie. That was it. The switch flipped. The grief and shock that had paralyzed me burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and clear. My promise to Marcus wasn't to his son, it wasn't to his company, it was to the truth. And Logan, in his greedy, craven rush to cash in, had absolved me of any lingering loyalty I might have felt to the Thorne name. He hadn't just fired me, he'd given me a new, more urgent mission, to protect Marcus Thorne's true legacy from the one person who should have been its guardian. I stood up, the empty scotch glass still in my hand, and walked back to the stacks of boxes. I ran my hand over the top one, the cardboard cool and solid beneath my palm. A legacy built on a lie is a tomb built on sand, and I was about to unleash a storm. I knew exactly what I had to do. The book would be written, the promise would be kept, and the world would finally learn the name Arthur Vance. The first step in any campaign is reconnaissance. For the next 2 days, my study transformed from a place of mourning into a war room. I didn't sleep. I survived on coffee, a specific smoky Lapsang Souchong that Marcus himself had introduced me to, the irony of which was not lost on me. I worked with a manic, focused energy I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a historian anymore, I was an insurgent. I unsealed the boxes. The smell of old paper, ink, and 30 years of my life filled the room. It was no longer the smell of defeat, it was the smell of ammunition. I didn't just have photocopies of Marcus's journals, I had them digitized, indexed, and cross-referenced with a database I had built myself over the last decade. Every name, every date, every damning admission was searchable. Logan thought he had fired a dusty old man with some notebook. He had no idea I was sitting on a private intelligence archive that would make the CIA blush. My plan began to form not as a single act of revenge, but as a series of carefully calculated moves. This couldn't be an emotional outburst. It had to be a precise surgical strike. It had to be undeniable. My first call was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cassandra, who specialized in intellectual property. I explained the situation. 30 years of service, the commissioned biography, the firing, and the mountain of research I now possessed. Her first question was the one I expected. "Owen, was your work on this biography considered work for hire under your employment contract?" It was complicated, I explained. The initial agreement with Marcus was a handshake deal. Over the years, HR tried to codify it, but Marcus always resisted. He saw it as a personal project, separate from my official duties as company historian. He paid the stipend for it out of his own pocket for the first 10 years. I have the records. Cassandra was silent for a moment. I could hear the faint sound of her typing. "This is a gray area, Owen, a very interesting one. They'll argue that any work you did on company time using company resources belongs to them. You'll argue it was a personal commission from the founder, that your notes and intellectual framework are your personal property, especially the materials you curated and created in your own time." "So who's right?" I asked. "Whoever has the better story and the deeper pockets for a legal fight," she said bluntly. "But here's the beautiful part. For them to claim ownership, they would have to sue you. A lawsuit would mean discovery. It would mean the contents of your research, the journals, the story of Arthur Vance would become a matter of public record. Logan Thorne, in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar IPO, would have to file a lawsuit to seize a historian's notes that detail his father's monumental fraud. The press would have a field day. She paused. It's a perfect case of mutually assured destruction. He can't touch you without blowing himself up. You have all the leverage. The words "all the leverage" echoed in my head. It was a powerful feeling. After feeling so powerless, it was like a shot of adrenaline. I paid Cassandra a retainer to be on standby. Checkmate, move one. My second move was to establish an intelligence network. I needed eyes and ears inside Veridia. There was only one person I trusted completely, Eleanor Vance. No relation to Arthur Vance, a coincidence that felt like a wink from the universe. Eleanor was the head of Archives and Records, a position I had helped create for her. I had hired her straight out of university 15 years ago. She was bright, meticulous, and fiercely loyal to the principle of historical integrity. She saw the archives not as a collection of old documents, but as the company's conscience. I met her for coffee at a small cafe miles away from the Veridia campus. She looked distressed, her face was pale, and her usual bright energy was gone. "It's a nightmare, Owen," she said before I could even ask. "Logan has brought in a team of corporate efficiency consultants. They're shredding everything. Decades of records, engineering notes, old marketing materials, personnel files. They call it data minimization for regulatory compliance. I call it burning the evidence." "He's trying to erase the past," I said. "He's trying to erase any record that contradicts the story he's selling to Wall Street," she corrected me. "He asked me for the access logs to the deep archive, the one you curated." A knot formed in my stomach. "What did you tell him?" She gave me a small, defiant smile. "I told him the logs were corrupted during a recent server migration, and that the only person with the administrative knowledge to potentially restore them had just been streamlined out of the company." I could have hugged her. She was a saboteur, a quiet resistor fighting her own battle on the inside. "Eleanor," I said, my voice low, "I'm not letting him get away with it. I'm writing the book, the real one." Her eyes lit up. "What do you need?" "Anything that shows a pattern of him dismantling the company's history, memos, emails, shredding orders. Anything that proves this isn't about privacy, it's about fraud." She nodded, a silent promise passing between us. "I'll be your ghost in the machine," she whispered. My insider was in place. Checkmate, move two. The third and most crucial part of my plan was to give the ghost a voice. Arthur Vance was the victim, the linchpin of the whole story. But he was long dead. His story needed a living champion. It took me a full day of digging through genealogical records, old news clippings, and public databases, but I found her, Dr. Eris Vance, Arthur Vance's granddaughter. She was a tenured history professor at a prestigious university on the East Coast, specializing in the history of science and technology. Making that call was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I was a stranger, about to call this woman and reopen a wound that had scarred her family for generations. I rehearsed what I would say a dozen times, but when her voice came on the line, professional and crisp, my script went out the window. "Dr. Vance," I began, my own voice unsteady. "My name is Owen. I was the company historian for Veridia Dynamics for 30 years. I believe I have some information about your grandfather, Arthur Vance." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "My grandfather," she said, her voice now tinged with suspicion. "What about him?" "I was a friend of Marcus Thorne's," I said, "and for many years I've been in possession of his private journals. Your grandfather's story is in those journals, the real story." I heard a sound that might have been a choked sob. "We always knew," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My father told me stories, that his father was cheated, that he built that company and had it stolen from him, but we never had proof. It was just a bitter family legend." "It's not a legend," I said softly. "It's the truth, and I have the proof, every word of it in Marcus Thorne's own hand." We talked for over an hour. I told her everything, about the journals, the partnership, the betrayal. I told her about Logan's IPO and his attempt to erase both her grandfather and me from the story. By the end of the call, we were no longer strangers. We were allies, united by a common cause to restore one legacy and dismantle another. She didn't want money. She wanted justice. She wanted her grandfather's name cleared and his contribution to history acknowledged. The human element was now in play. Checkmate, move 3. Now all the pieces were on the board. I had the legal cover, the inside source, and the righteous cause. The only thing left was to write the opening salvo. I sat down at my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating the stacks of research around me. I began to write. I didn't write an angry tirade. I wrote a chapter of a history book. It was cold, factual, and utterly devastating. I titled the chapter, The Ghost in the Machine, Arthur Vance and the True Founding of Veridia Dynamics. I started with the garage, painting a vivid picture of two young, brilliant friends on the cusp of changing the world. I used Marcus's own words, quoting his journal entries where he praised Arthur's genius. Then, step by step, I laid out the betrayal. I cited the partnership agreements, the financial records, and the key, damning journal entries where Marcus detailed his methodical, cold-blooded plan to oust his partner. I ended the chapter with the final, chilling entry Marcus wrote the day he learned of Arthur's death. The final invoice has been paid. The company is truly mine now. A necessary cost. It was a masterpiece of sourced, undeniable truth. I read it over and over, polishing every sentence until it was as sharp and as hard as a diamond. This was more than a chapter. It was a weapon. Finally, it was ready. I opened my email and composed a new message. The recipient was Sarah Jenkins, the top investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Her reputation was legendary. She was a Pulitzer winner who had brought down corrupt politicians and fraudulent CEOs. She didn't just report the news, she made it. The subject line was simple, the unauthorized biography of Marcus Thorne, Chapter 1. In the body of the email, I wrote, Ms. Jenkins, my name is Owen. For 30 years, I was the authorized biographer and company historian for Marcus Thorne and Veridia Dynamics. Last week, I was fired by the founder's son, Logan Thorne, who is currently preparing the company for an IPO built on a sanitized, fraudulent myth of his father's legacy. Marcus Thorne entrusted me with his private journals and made me promise to tell the whole story. Logan Thorne is trying to bury it. I intend to keep my promise. Attached is the first chapter of what is now an unauthorized biography. It contains information sourced directly from Marcus Thorne's own hand that will be of material interest to anyone considering investing in Veridia Dynamics. The truth has a longer shelf life than myth. Sincerely, Owen. I attached the document. My hand hovered over the send button for a long moment. This was the point of no return. The quiet war was about to go public. I took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and brewing tea filling my senses, and then I clicked. The silence that followed the click of the mouse was the loudest I'd ever experienced. It was the silence of a stone dropped into a deep, dark well, the agonizing wait before the splash. I had launched the first missile, and now all I could do was wait for it to land. The next 48 hours were a blur of nervous energy. I paced my study. I brewed endless pots of tea. I reread the chapter 100 times, second-guessing every word, every comma. Had I been too aggressive? Not aggressive enough. Eleanor was my only lifeline to the outside world. She sent me encrypted messages, brief but potent updates from inside the belly of the beast. Logan was in full IPO mode, hosting lavish dinners for investment bankers, his face plastered across trade publications, spinning his yarn about his father's solitary genius. He was building a house of cards on a fault line, completely oblivious to the tremor I had just triggered. A recurring phrase started to form in my mind, something I knew was true to my core. A legacy built on a lie is a tomb built on sand. On the third morning, my phone rang. The caller ID was an unknown New York number. My heart hammered against my ribs. I let it ring 3 times, took a calming breath, and answered. Owen. The voice was sharp, professional, and had no time for pleasantries. This is he. Sarah Jenkins, Wall Street Journal. I read your chapter. There was a pause, and in that moment my entire future hung in the balance. It's extraordinary, she said, and the sourcing is impeccable. I've had my researchers doing preliminary checks for the last 2 days. The timelines, the early corporate filings. What you have here is solid. But the journals are the key. Are you willing to let me see the originals? I am, I said, my voice steady despite the relief washing over me. On one condition. You also speak with Dr. Eris Vance. The story isn't just about Marcus Thorne's fraud. It's about her grandfather's stolen legacy. Already on my list, Sarah replied, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. I have a source inside Veridia's IPO team. They're getting ready to file their S1 with the SEC next week. The timing on this couldn't be better. Can you be in New York tomorrow? The next day, I was sitting in a conference room at the Wall Street Journal's headquarters, a place that felt like the nerve center of the financial world. Across from me sat Sarah Jenkins and two of her senior editors. They handled Marcus's journals with the reverence of museum curators, their eyes scanning the brittle pages, the angry, jagged handwriting. They cross-referenced my chapter with the source material, their expressions shifting from journalistic skepticism to wide-eyed astonishment. He admits it all, one of the editors murmured, looking up from a journal. He calls Vance the better half of my brain and then lays out a plan to cut him out like a tumor. My God. Sarah looked at me. Logan Thorne has no idea this exists, does he? He saw them as old papers, I said. He's so focused on the future he never bothered to understand his own past. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it, Sarah said with a grim smile. This is a front-page story, Owen. We're going to run it the day after they file their S1. The moment their prospectus with its fraudulent version of the company's history becomes a public document, we hit them with the truth. The plan was brilliant. It wasn't just a story, it was a trap. By filing the S1, Logan would be officially submitting a legally binding document to the government and the public that claimed Marcus Thorne was the sole founder, a document that would be proven to be a lie the very next day. I flew home feeling a sense of grim purpose. The gears were in motion. The waiting was the hardest part. Eleanor's messages became more frequent. The atmosphere at Veridia was tense. The IPO prep was all-consuming. Logan was strutting around the office like a king, completely unaware of the guillotine being sharpened over his head. Then, on a Monday morning, Eleanor sent a one-word message, filed. The S1 was public. I downloaded it immediately. It was worse than I could have imagined. It was a 300-page work of fiction, a legal document attesting to the myth of Marcus Thorne. It mentioned his visionary leadership and unparalleled integrity no fewer than 17 times. Arthur Vance's name was nowhere to be found. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I made my tea, sat in my study, and opened the Wall Street Journal's website. And there it was. The headline was a cannon shot across the bow of the entire financial industry. Veridia IPO rocked by founder's secret journals. Did a solitary genius steal his company? The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Sarah Jenkins had woven together my research, Marcus's own words, and an emotional, powerful interview with Dr. Eris Vance. She quoted the key passages from the journals, the cold, calculated entries detailing the betrayal. She included a photo of a young Marcus Thorne and a handsome, smiling Arthur Vance standing proudly in front of their first workshop. It was a photo I had discovered in a forgotten box, a photo that Logan's efficiency consultants would have undoubtedly shredded. The article ended by mentioning that the full story would be told in an upcoming unauthorized biography by me, Owen, the company's recently terminated historian. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Eleanor's first message arrived at 7:05 a.m. Chaos. Logan is screaming. Lawyers are everywhere. The phones are melting. By 9:30 a.m., when the stock market opened, Veridia wasn't the day's hot new offering. It was a toxic asset. The investment banks underwriting the IPO immediately put the deal on hold, a euphemism for dead on arrival. Financial news channels, which had been praising Veridia's potential just yesterday, were now running segments questioning the company's very foundation. Dr. S. Vance was on a national morning show, telling her family's story with poise and dignity, putting a human face on the corporate malfeasance. She wasn't an angry accuser, she was a historian, just like me, setting the record straight. The panic inside Veridia was palpable, even through Eleanor's brief messages. Logan had apparently locked himself in his office with a team of frantic lawyers trying to figure out how to respond. His first move was a predictable one. At noon, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. It was a cease and desist letter from a high-powered law firm accusing me of corporate espionage, theft of company property, and defamation. It threatened me with a lawsuit that would financially obliterate me. I read it, a strange sense of calm settling over me. This was the move Cassandra had predicted. This was Logan's panicked, clumsy attempt to bully me into silence. Following my lawyer's precise instructions, I did not respond. I simply scanned the letter and emailed it as a PDF to Sarah Jenkins with a simple note, their official response. An hour later, the journal's website had an update to the story. Veridia Dynamics threatens fired historian with lawsuit in an apparent attempt to suppress founders' journals. The story went from being about a historical injustice to a current-day cover-up. Logan had taken a bucket of gasoline and thrown it on the fire. He had confirmed my entire narrative. The silent takeover was complete. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't fired a shot, I had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had shattered the company's future. The power had shifted. The historian they had dismissed as a relic of the past now controlled their destiny. The fallout from the Wall Street Journal article was not a slow burn, it was a wildfire. The narrative Logan had spent millions to craft was incinerated overnight. He had wanted to be seen as the savvy heir to a great genius, the man leading a legacy into a bright new future. Instead, he was cast as the villain in a story of corporate greed and historical erasure. The power shift was palpable, and it began with the one thing a company like Veridia, built on innovation, could not afford to lose: its talent. It started not with a bang, but with an exodus. The first to go were the old-timers, the engineers and project managers who had worked under Marcus. These were people who, like me, remembered the real Veridia, not the sanitized version Logan was trying to sell. They saw the article not just as an exposé of the founder, but as a betrayal of the company's soul. They had tolerated Logan's MBA speak and his obsession with synergy and optimization, but this was different. This was an attack on their own history. Eleanor sent me a message late one evening. It's a ghost town in the senior engineering wing. 4 of the 5 principal architects submitted their resignations today. All of them cited a fundamental divergence in corporate values. That's their polite way of saying they don't want to work for a liar. These weren't just any engineers. These were the keepers of the institutional knowledge, the ones who understood the deep, complex architecture of Veridia's core systems, systems whose foundations were first laid by Arthur Vance. Logan, in his arrogance, had always seen these veterans as expensive relics. He was about to learn a hard lesson in value. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. The most significant departure came a week later. It was Eleanor herself. She didn't just quit. She sent a company-wide email, which she blind copied to me. It was a masterclass in professional defiance. She announced her resignation and stated that as the keeper of the company's records, she could no longer work for an organization that had so little regard for the truth. She ended the email with a quote she attributed to Marcus Thorne, a quote I had given her: "A company that forgets its history has no future." The email was a dagger to the heart of what little morale was left. It signaled that the rot was not just in the past, it was in the present. The talent exodus became a flood. The best and brightest, the people who had options, started polishing their resumes. Recruiters began circling Veridia like vultures. Logan, trapped and flailing, resorted to desperate counter-manipulation. Having failed with legal threats, he tried to buy my silence. My phone rang one afternoon. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I had a feeling who it was. I let it go to voicemail. The message that followed was almost comical in its desperation. It was Logan Thorne. His voice, stripped of its usual arrogant confidence, was strained and pleading. "Owen, it's Logan. Listen, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I acted rashly. What you did publishing that, it's caused a lot of damage, but maybe there's a way to fix it. We can put out a joint statement, clarify things. We can restart the biography project, your project, with a bigger budget, a much bigger budget. Just call me back. We can make this right." I saved the voicemail. It was a trophy. He didn't understand. It was never about the money or the job. It was about the promise I had made to his father. It was about the truth. The book was not for sale. His next move was even more pathetic. He tried to discredit me publicly. A press release went out from Veridia claiming that I was a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta and that the journals were taken out of context or were potentially fabricated. This was another gift. I forwarded the press release to Sarah Jenkins. Her response was swift. The journal published a follow-up piece. This time they published high-resolution photographs of the journal pages themselves side by side with my transcripts. They even brought in a forensic handwriting expert who confirmed the writing belonged to Marcus Thorne. Logan's claim of fabrication was not just refuted, it was humiliated. He was trying to fight a documented fact with a desperate lie, and he was losing badly. The final piece of the power shift came from the market itself. Dr. Aris Vance, now a celebrated figure for her grace and strength, announced that her family was exploring legal options to posthumously reclaim a portion of her grandfather's intellectual property and founding stake in the company. Their claim was strong, backed by the irrefutable evidence I had provided. This news sent a shockwave through Veridia's existing shareholders. The prospect of a massive multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that could dilute their own holdings sent the company's private valuation into a nosedive. The IPO wasn't just on hold, it was a distant, laughable memory. The foundation of sand on which Logan had built his future had given way, and the entire structure was collapsing into the sea. The vindication I felt wasn't a loud, triumphant roar, it was a quiet, deep satisfaction. It was the feeling of a carefully laid plan clicking into place, of a complex machine humming to life exactly as designed. The phone call I had been waiting for finally came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 1 month after I had been fired. It was Logan. This time I answered, "What do you want, Owen?" His voice was a wreck, a hollowed-out shell of his former self. There was no anger, no pleading, just the flat, dead tone of defeat. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I replied, "I don't want anything from you, Logan. You've destroyed it," he whispered. "Everything. The IPO, the company, my father's name." This was the moment, the culmination of 30 years of loyalty and 1 month of calculated rebellion. I thought about all the things I could say. I could have gloated, I could have berated him for his arrogance, for his stupidity. But I chose my words carefully, aiming them not like a bludgeon, but like a scalpel. "No, Logan," I said, my voice calm and even. "You destroyed it. You did it the moment you decided to sell a myth instead of honoring a legacy. You called my work an anchor to the past. You were wrong. A company's history isn't an anchor that holds it back. It's a foundation, and you built yours on stolen ground. You wanted to protect your family's privacy, but you disrespected its history. You can't have one without the other." I paused, letting the words sink in. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "I kept my promise to your father," I continued. "I told the whole story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This isn't the story I wanted to write, Logan, but it's the one you forced me to. Your father was a complicated man, but he understood one thing you don't. Truth has a longer shelf life." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I gently ended the call, the final quiet click, severing the last tie to my old life. The news came 2 days later, not from Eleanor or a phone call, but from the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section. The headline was stark: "Logan Thorne resigns as CEO of Veridia Dynamics amidst scandal, board to explore strategic alternatives." The article detailed how the board of directors, facing a litany of shareholder lawsuits and a potential SEC investigation into their fraudulent IPO prospectus, had forced him out. The company, crippled by the talent exodus and the looming legal battle with the Vance family, was likely to be broken up and sold for parts, the very thing Logan had planned to do, but now at a fraction of the value. He had asset stripped his own inheritance. My new reality began to take shape. I wasn't just the fired historian anymore. I was the author of one of the most anticipated business books in a decade. A major publisher had reached out, offering me a significant advance. The book was no longer just a biography of Marcus Thorne. It was the story of Veridia, of Arthur Vance, of truth and of consequence. Dr. Aris Vance had agreed to write the foreword. We were working together to establish a grant in her grandfather's name, a fund to support young unheralded engineers and inventors, funded by a portion of the book's proceeds. His legacy would not be a footnote in another man's story. It would be a force for good in the future. My study, once a tomb, was now a vibrant workspace. The boxes of research were no longer a monument to a dead project, but the living heart of a new one. I sat at my desk, looking at the contract from my publisher, my name printed in bold black ink, Owen, author. I had not just reclaimed my purpose, I had forged a new one, stronger and more meaningful than the one I had lost. The vindication was complete. It was quiet, it was total, and it was mine. In the end, it's funny how things turn out. Logan Thorne wanted to build a legacy on a myth, a towering monument to a man who never existed. He thought history was something you could edit, something you could crop and filter to fit a narrative for an IPO. But history isn't a document you can shred, it's a current that runs through everything. You can try to dam it up, you can try to divert it, but sooner or later the water will find its level, the truth will find a way out. My new office doesn't have a view of a sprawling corporate campus. It's the same study in my house, but it feels different now. It feels like a command center, not a sanctuary. The leather chair is the same, but I feel lighter sitting in it. The work is harder, more intense than it ever was at Veridia, but it's my own. The book, The Ghost in the Machine, is set to be released next fall. Dr. Vance and I have become close friends, partners in the shared duty of setting the record straight. We're not just telling the story of two men, we're telling a larger story about how easily brilliance can be erased, and how vital it is to fight for the truth, no matter how long it's been buried. We're restoring a legacy, piece by piece. Sometimes I think about Logan. I picture him in a smaller office now, or maybe no office at all, haunted by the ghost of a man he never knew and the historian he so casually dismissed. He learned a hard lesson that many people in power never grasp. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who has done the reading. He thought he was erasing the past, but he only managed to erase himself. So here's the moral of my story, the lesson I learned in the quiet of my study, surrounded by 30 years of other people's memories. Your work, your integrity, your knowledge, that is your true capital. It's the one asset that no one can take from you. People will try. They will try to undervalue you, to sideline you, to make you feel like a relic. They will tell you that you are an anchor to the past when what they really fear is the truth you represent. Don't let them. Know your value. Document your contributions, and never ever let anyone else write your story for you, because a legacy built on a lie is nothing more than a tomb built on sand, and the slightest breeze of truth can blow it all away. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or had your contributions erased, let me know your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. Please like this video if you found it satisfying, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for listening.